The breaking of a woman. The prairie at dusk is a strange kind of mirror. It shows you not your face, but your soul. The tall grasses bend under wind, gold brushed into shadow, and the sky burns itself down to embers. It was beneath such a sky that a young woman sat, her knees drawn close, her hands trembling against her dress. Her name was Ellen May once, a name her mother spoke soft as honey, but tonight she was no one. Her in-laws had seen to that. Her hair, long and chestnut, once the only crown she ever owned, lay in hacked-off clumps around her. It had been taken by rough hands and dull shears, cut not to tidy her, but to humble her. And when the shears were done, they blackened her cheeks and forehead with soot from the stove, smearing her face until no neighbor could mistake the message. She was not wanted. She was shamed. The neighbors had watched. They always watched. Windows cracked open just enough for eyes to peek, not enough for hearts to act. Some muttered prayers under their breath. Others shook their heads. None stepped forward. The West was cruel in ways the wind could not explain. Sometimes it was not bandits nor bullets that broke a woman, but silence. Ellen had been married 5 years, though if you asked her heart it might tell you she had been alone the whole time. Her husband, Samuel, was a man whose charm ended at the church door. He liked the sound of laughter, so long as it wasn't hers. He liked the idea of a wife, so long as she carried no burden to him. When fever took him 2 winters past, Ellen did not wail. Her tears came in private, not for the man he was, but for the dreams that had died with him. Still, his family took her in, not out of kindness, but because in the eyes of the town, it was their duty. Duty was a poor kind of shelter. She became the hands that washed, the back that bent, the mouth that stayed shut. They fed her scraps when the table was bare, gave her rags when clothes tore. They never struck her, not with fists. They struck with words, with looks, with the long drawn-out sighs that told her she was a burden too heavy to love. And when the whispers grew, that perhaps she should find another man, that perhaps she lingered too long under their roof, their patience thinned. This night had been the breaking point. They gathered her before the yard, neighbors pretending to pass by. The matriarch, hard-faced and bitter, held the shears. The brothers held her down. They cut away the hair that once brushed Samuel's cheek. When she cried out, they laughed, said she was too proud of a face, not worth much. Then they smeared her with soot, blackened her until she looked more ghost than woman. When it was done, they shoved her aside like ashes from a hearth, and the neighbors turned away. She sat in that dirt until night crept in, stars peeking through as though ashamed to watch. Her scalp burned where hair had been tugged. Her hands were raw from holding back tears. But Ellen did not scream. She did not rise to curse them. Her silence was not weakness. It was the last armor she owned. In that silence, memory came. Her mother's voice, soft and lilting. Your hair is your river, Ellen May. Let it flow, let it grow. It carries your years with grace. Her husband's voice, sharp and careless. Don't fuss with it. Ain't no man married a woman for hair. Her own voice whispered now in the dark. Who am I without it? She touched the rough shorn ends and felt nothing but jaggedness. Somewhere on the edge of town, a horse shifted. The sound was faint, yet it threaded into her ears. She lifted her eyes and caught sight of him, the loner rancher. Folks had names for him, though never to his face. Some called him Caleb, the widow's ghost. Others said he was half wild, part Comanche, part outlaw, part sorrow. No one knew the whole truth, only that he lived alone on land that stretched wide and empty, a place where grass grew taller than men and coyotes sang him lullabies. He was a figure at the edges of life. He came to town only when need forced him, grain, tools, salt. He spoke little, tipped his hat to no one. His eyes were the kind that seemed to look straight through you, like twin lanterns left burning too long. And there he was, mounted quiet upon a dark horse, watching. Not leering, not pitying, just watching, the way the prairie watches, endless, patient. Ellen's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she thought he might ride on. Men like him did not pause for women broken in a yard. But he stayed, a shadow cut against the dying light. Then, As if deciding nothing worth seeing lay here, he turned the horse and vanished into the distance. She was left again with silence. Later, when the cold grew cruel, the in-laws did not call her inside. They barred the door, let her sit in night's teeth. She wrapped herself in the thin shawl left on her shoulders, each breath a cloud, each moment heavier than the last. The prairie stretched around her like a graveyard. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote cried. By dawn she was still there. Pale light spilled across the dirt. Her eyes burned from sleeplessness. Children passed on their way to chores, staring. Women clutched their baskets tighter. Men spat into the dust and muttered about shame. Ellen stood finally, her body stiff, her pride held together with threads. She thought to walk, to where, she did not know. Away, just away. She took one step, then another. Her shoes, thin and worn, scraped the earth. She moved past the church, past the well, past the mercantile. The town swallowed her whole. Each gaze upon her another stone laid on her back. And yet she walked, for what else was left? But even as she walked, there was the faint echo of hoofbeats behind her. Slow, deliberate, not rushing, not threatening. Just there. She did not turn. Not yet. The air seemed to hold its breath. The loner rancher steps in. The morning light was cruel, sharp as glass against Ellen's shorn head and blackened cheeks. Children had whispered when they saw her. Men muttered low. Women turned their faces. The world had conspired to tell her she was nothing. She carried her nothingness down the road, barefoot now, her shoes left behind when the leather split. Dust clung to her skin. Tears left faint trails across the soot. She did not look back toward the house that had been Samuel's, nor toward the family that had turned her into a public jest. Her steps were heavy but steady. If she could not be loved, she could at least be gone. But the hoofbeats followed, soft at first, like echoes in a canyon. Then firmer, closer, sure as a heartbeat. Ellen's chest tightened. She told herself not to turn. She had no strength left to meet another jeer, another pitying stare. The sound drew nearer until it matched her pace. Then, without warning, a shadow moved over her, swallowing her in shade. She stopped. The horse was tall, black as river stone, with eyes like molten dusk. And astride him sat the loner rancher. Caleb. The town called him ghost, outlaw, recluse. But here, before her, he was simply a man who looked at her without flinching. For a long moment, nothing stirred but the wind through grass. Ellen lowered her eyes, ashamed of her soot-streaked face, her ragged hair. His voice came then, low and steady, like gravel warmed by the sun. "You're coming with me." The words were not loud. They were not cruel. They were not even a question. They were steady as the land itself, carved deep like water through stone. Ellen blinked, certain she had misheard. Her lips parted, but no answer came. Her in-laws, who had followed to make sport of her, snickered from behind. The matriarch's sharp tongue rang out. "Take her, if you want her. She's a burden we don't aim to keep." Laughter followed, mean and jagged. A few neighbors chuckled nervously, as though joining in made them less complicit. But Caleb did not move, did not answer them. He dismounted in silence, boots heavy in the dust. Standing before Ellen, he reached out, not to grab, not to force, but to steady. His hand was rough, scarred, yet gentle as it hovered near her elbow. Ellen looked up into eyes she could not quite name. Not pity, not desire. Something quieter, something harder. Something like recognition. Her in-laws jeered again. "Better you than us, Caleb. She'll weigh you down same as she did Samuel." But the rancher said nothing. He only placed his coat across Ellen's shoulders, the fabric heavy, smelling faintly of leather and pine smoke. Then, with one arm, he lifted her onto his horse as though she weighed no more than a feather. He mounted behind her. The black horse snorted, restless, but Caleb's hand on the reins steadied him. And before anyone could speak further, he turned the horse and rode away. The road stretched long and empty, lined with brittle grass and sky. Ellen sat stiff, her hands clutched against her lap. Why did you do this?" Her voice broke through the silence, thin as paper. Caleb did not answer at once. The horse's hooves beat steady rhythm into the dirt, the prairie unfolding in endless waves around them. Finally, he spoke, voice rough but calm. Couldn't leave you there. That was all. No grand speech. No promises. Just those 4 words. Ellen closed her eyes. Something in her wanted to weep, to scream, to laugh bitterly. Instead, she stayed still, listening to the cadence of hooves, feeling the coat heavy on her shoulders, warm against her chilled skin. For the first time in years, the silence around her was not cruel. They rode until the town was no more than a dot behind them. Wide land opened, hills rolling, mesquite trees scattered like guardians. Caleb's ranch appeared at last, simple and sprawling. Fences crooked but sturdy. A small cabin, smoke curling thin from its chimney. Corrals for horses. Fields left half fallow but alive. It was not wealth, but it was space. Space enough for breath. He helped her down, steadying her as her legs trembled. She looked around, dazed. This is yours? He gave the faintest nod. I live here. Ellen touched the coat still draped on her. The enormity of it pressed in. This man had taken her from shame into silence, from mockery into sanctuary. But why? The question churned inside her. Did he mean to claim her as men did, body for body? Did he pity her, think her weak? She stole a glance at him as he tied the horse. His face was weathered, lines carved deep by sun and solitude. His eyes, though, were steady, not on her, but on the tasks before him. He did not touch her again. He did not demand. He only said food inside, rest. Then he walked into the cabin, leaving the door open for her to follow. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and earth. Sparse clean. A table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with jars of dried beans and coffee. A bed in the corner, neatly made. Ellen hesitated on the threshold. She felt like a trespasser in a world too quiet, too untarnished for her soot-stained presence. But Caleb set bread on the table, a tin cup of water beside it. He nodded toward the chair. Eat. She lowered herself slowly, fingers trembling as she broke the bread. Hunger gnawed, but shame fought it. She ate anyway, each bite tasting of salt and something she had nearly forgotten, care. He did not watch her. He busied himself with tending the fire, mending a strap of leather. His silence was not cold. It was a silence that gave her room. When she had finished, she whispered, "Thank you." Caleb inclined his head slightly. Then he pointed toward a small trunk near the hearth. "Clothes there. My sister's long ago. Might fit." Ellen swallowed hard. She wanted to ask about the sister, where she'd gone, why she was no longer here. But the look on his face told her the subject was one not spoken. She nodded instead, rising, clutching the coat closer. That night, she lay on the bed he gave her, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of cedar. Caleb took the chair by the hearth, leaning back, boots crossed at the ankle. He said nothing, only whittled a piece of wood into shavings that fell like snow at his feet. Ellen watched him through half-closed eyes. She expected him to look at her, to wait for her guard to fall. But he did not. His gaze never drifted from the small task in his hands. The firelight painted his features in amber, his shadows long against the walls. For the first time in years, Ellen's body loosened. Sleep came not as an enemy, but as an old friend returned. She dreamed of rivers, of hair uncut, flowing. She dreamed of a voice that did not scold or mock, but said only, "You're safe." And when dawn came again, it did not feel like cruelty. It felt like the edge of something new, the bloom of trust. The days that followed drifted like smoke, slow and unhurried. Ellen woke each morning expecting sharp voices, expecting to be told what task she had failed, what shame she carried. But there was only the creak of the cabin's wood and the faint sounds of Caleb outside, splitting logs or tending horses. It unsettled her at first, this silence without cruelty. She had lived too long with noise made from scorn. But slowly, like sunlight pushing through shutters, she began to breathe again. Her hair, once butchered, began to grow. Short, uneven locks softened at the edges. She combed them with her fingers by the hearth, remembering her mother's words about rivers and grace. In the cabin's small mirror, her face no longer bore streaks of soot. She could see her own eyes again, tired, Yes, but not gone. Caleb never spoke of that night, never asked. His silence was not ignorance, it was mercy. He gave her room to heal without forcing confession. She found her hands longing for work, not because he demanded it, but because she needed to feel useful again. So she mended shirts left ragged, scrubbed pans that had gone black with years of use, tended chickens that clucked outside. Caleb said nothing when she worked. Sometimes she thought he didn't even notice. But then she would catch small signs. A shirt she mended worn the very next day, eggs she gathered fried and eaten without a word. It was enough. One morning, a neighbor came riding by, an older widow named Mrs. Wilkins, her face weathered kindly, her hair bound in a gray bun. She brought a basket of flour and sugar, set it gently on the table, and gave Ellen a long look. "So it's true," she said softly, "a woman can bloom again even in hard soil." Ellen flushed, unsure how to answer. Mrs. Wilkins smiled, patted her hand, and added, "Don't mistake his silence for indifference. Caleb's a man who plants his words sparingly, but when they take root, they grow strong." Then she was gone, leaving Ellen with her thoughts. In the afternoons, Ellen sometimes wandered to the corral where a boy of maybe 14 helped Caleb break horses. The boy, Tommy, was quick with laughter, his hands always dusty, his voice carrying tunes he half made up. At first, Ellen watched from a distance, hesitant. But Tommy greeted her like he had known her forever. "Ma'am, you got away with the colts," he said one day, handing her a carrot. The nervous horse took it from her palm, nuzzling her fingers. Ellen smiled despite herself, and Tommy grinned wide. "See? Even critters know a kind heart when they see one." The boy's easy talk made her laugh, the sound strange in her own ears. It had been so long since laughter had lived in her throat. Caleb, standing nearby, turned his head at the sound. He didn't smile, not outwardly, but something softened in the lines around his eyes. But even as days brightened, nights brought shadows. Ellen would wake from dreams of her in-laws, their hands gripping, their laughter sharp. She would sit up, trembling, pressing her face in her knees. Once in such a night, she found Caleb awake by the fire, whittling wood into smooth shapes. He did not ask what haunted her. He only set down the knife, poured her a cup of warm tea, and placed it gently in her hands. She whispered why. He met her eyes for a moment, the firelight catching flecks of gold in the dark. "Because I could not watch them break you." That was all. Then he returned to his chair, letting her sip the tea in peace. Ellen sat long after, those words turning in her chest like embers. She began to notice him differently then. The way he rose at dawn, not for himself, but for the animals that relied on him. The way he checked fences with steady patience, never rushing. The way he kept his tools sharp, his hands scarred but careful. He was a man who did not take more than the land could give, who did not waste words or kindness. And slowly, Ellen's heart began to ease into something unfamiliar, safety. One evening, storm clouds gathered heavy over the prairie. Thunder rolled like a drumbeat, and rain lashed against the cabin roof. Ellen stood at the window, watching the world blur into gray. She thought of her mother, of Samuel, of the years lost to silence and shame. Tears welled, though she told herself she had no right to them. Caleb came quietly, setting a cup of tea beside her on the sill. He did not touch her, did not ask. She looked at the steam rising, then at him. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, his eyes meeting hers just long enough to kindle something warm. It was not love yet. Love was too grand a word for the fragile thread that stretched between them. It was something simpler, something deeper, the beginning of trust. As the storm passed, Ellen felt the air shift inside her. She was no longer only the woman whose hair had been cut and face blackened. She was becoming someone else, someone who could laugh with a boy, share tea in silence, stand tall in her own reflection. And though she could not yet name it, she knew. This was the soil in which her spirit might grow roots again. Word of Ellen's new refuge traveled like prairie fire. Whispers carried down the dusty streets of town, carried in wagons to the church steps, carried by tongues that found more comfort in gossip than in prayer. She's living with him now. With Caleb. Never thought he'd take a woman. Not just any woman, the cast-off one. The news swelled until it reached the ears of the very family who had cast her out. And what shame burned in them was not shame of their cruelty, but shame that she dared to rise after it. So one afternoon, as the cicadas sang hot in the grass, Ellen saw them approach. Her in-laws came riding hard, dust lifting like smoke behind them. The matriarch sat upright in the wagon, her mouth pinched, her eyes sharp as knives. The brothers rode beside, faces twisted in scorn. Ellen's chest tightened, her hands stilling in the washing basin. The boy Tommy, nearby, stiffened. Caleb, splitting wood in the yard, did not look up at once. He finished his strike, set the axe down steady, then turned. They drew up at the fence, voices loud enough for the land itself to hear. "You can't keep her here, Caleb. She belongs with us. She's our blood by marriage." Caleb stepped forward, boots crunching slow on gravel. He said nothing, only fixed his gaze on them. The matriarch's voice rose. "You think you can hide her? She's shamed, ruined. You'll drag yourself down by keeping her." Ellen's knees weakened. Old fear rose, curling like smoke in her chest. She wanted to shrink, to vanish. But behind her, Caleb's presence was solid, unmoving, like standing near a great oak that would not bend a storm. Finally, his voice came, low and steady. "She's not yours to break again." The brothers laughed sharp. "Not yours neither, Caleb. You think you can claim her, a woman no one else wants? What's she to you?" For the first time, his eyes flashed, not loud but fierce. "She's under my roof. She's safe here. That's enough." The tension hung thick. Hands drifted to gun belts, words sharp as drawn steel. Neighbors began to gather at the edges of the road, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Wilkins among them, her eyes keen, her jaw set. The matriarch sneered. "You can't keep her. She's weak. She's nothing." Something inside Ellen snapped then. For too long, she had let their words cut her, define her. But here, now, with Caleb's steady silence holding her up, she felt strength rise from a place she thought was dead. She stepped forward. Her voice, though trembling, carried. "No, I'm not nothing." The crowd hushed. The brothers turned to her, disbelief on their faces. "I'm not yours anymore," she said, her words gaining weight. "You took my hair, you blackened my face, you tried to bury me in shame. But I lived, and I will not go back to your house. My life is mine now." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Mrs. Wilkins stepped closer, her voice firm. "She speaks true. We all saw what you did, and still she stands. That's no weakness, that's strength." Others began to nod. A man muttered, "She deserves better." Another said, "Let her be." The tide shifted. The power her in-laws once held crumbled beneath the weight of a town that had finally found its courage. The matriarch's lips pressed thin. She hissed, "You'll regret this." But Caleb stepped forward, his frame blocking Ellen from their sight. His words came quiet, unshaken. "Leave." And for once they did. Fury in their eyes, but defeat in their silence. They turned their horses and wagon and rode off, swallowed by dust. When they were gone, the neighbors lingered, murmuring. Some looked at Ellen with new respect. Some with shame, knowing they had stayed silent too long. But one by one they drifted back to their homes, leaving the yard quiet again. Ellen stood trembling, her breath ragged. Caleb turned to her. For a moment, she thought he might speak some grand comfort. But all he said was, "You held your ground." And she realized he didn't need to rescue her voice. He only needed to stand beside her until she found it. That night, the cabin glowed with firelight. Ellen sat by the hearth, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Caleb sat across from her, whittling, as always, the sound of blade against wood steady. She looked at him, at the man who had said so few words, yet had given her back so much. "You gave me back my life," she whispered. He paused, lifted his eyes to hers. His reply was slow, honest. "No, you just needed a place to remember you had one." Her throat tightened, tears shining. She smiled through them, soft and full. In the silence that followed, something bloomed, gentle, steady, rooted. Not the rush of infatuation, not the fire of passion, but the deep warmth of two souls finding shelter in one another. The prairie outside stretched endless, the stars wheeling above. In the cabin, the fire burned steady, two figures quiet against the dark. And the old voice of the storyteller whispers still. Sometimes the loneliest souls are the gentlest hands. Sometimes the broken find their shelter not in walls, but in each other. And so, friends, that's where we leave Ellen and the Loner Rancher. Two souls who found strength not in shouting, but in silence. Not in claiming, but in giving. If this tale stirred something in your heart, I'd ask you to share a word in the comments so others may feel it too. Tell me where in the world you sit tonight, listening to this Wild West story by firelight. And if you'd like more tales of the West, of hardship, of hope, of love born slow as dawn, then like, share, and subscribe. So the stories keep living, as long as there are hearts to hear them.